AM 1110 Radio Disney's in your community. What's happening in your town? Who's making a difference in your neighborhood? Let's find out from LaFern Cusack now.
I'm speaking with Dr. Jenny Yip. She is a licensed psychologist and a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at USC Keck School of Medicine. She is a nationally recognized OCD expert and has successfully treated severe OCD and related anxiety disorders for over a decade. She is the executive director of the Renewed Freedom Center in Los Angeles, which she founded in 2008. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell me about OCD. What exactly does that mean?
Well, there are two parts to OCD, as you can imagine, obsessions and compulsions. Let me help define what each of that means. First of all, obsessions are unwanted, intrusive thoughts or images that are scary, gross, or weird that you can't stop thinking about. It makes you feel like something bad will happen to you, your loved ones, or even random strangers. Essentially, it's as if you're having a nightmare that keeps replaying in your mind over and over again like a broken record. Now, on the other hand, compulsions are the things you do physically or even mentally that makes you feel better to keep the bad things from happening. They can feel like habits that you can't stop doing, even when you try really hard or if it takes up a lot of your time. The problem is, whenever you feel better from doing a compulsion, it only gets stronger and harder to break. So many kids will request other family members to help them perform compulsions, and that's how family members as a whole can get stuck in that vicious OCD cycle.
How do you diagnose this in children? I mean, is it a learned behavior?
Well, we still don't know what exactly causes OCD. However, researchers do know that it's related to the neurotransmitter serotonin. Is it a learned behavior? Not necessarily, because evidence is strong that OCD does run in family. So because it is a neurochemical disorder, we have research and brain scans to illustrate that it is a genetic disease, not just a learned behavior.
How many children have OCD or an anxiety disorder?
Well, the latest statistics shows that OCD occurs in as many as 1 in 200 children and adolescents, which is the same number of kids with diabetes. However, this is probably an underestimate of the actual number of kids with OCD because many kids are either undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. And the reason is that many kids might feel scared or embarrassed by their symptoms and may hide them from families, friends, teachers. And on top of that, many school personnel or healthcare providers may not recognize the symptoms and falsely attribute them to the child's personality or even acting out behaviors. So as a whole, anxiety disorders, however, may affect over 25 million Americans alone. So that's a lot of people if you think about it. And if we were to put all of those anxiety sufferers into a single space, it would actually take up the whole population of the state of Texas. So as you can see, the reality is that OCD and anxiety disorders are more common than many other childhood disorders or illnesses.
Well, if a child has OCD and they're, doing this behavior, won't they see that as normal, that that's what they have been doing? So why would they be embarrassed by it if that's what they know?
I wouldn't say that most kids know that they have OCD. Most kids actually do not know what is happening with them. Imagine if you're, again, having this nightmare that you're replaying in your mind over and over again and you don't know why it's happening. You're trying to stop it and it won't stop. And then you're having to perform these behaviors that may sometimes be awkward or weird to make yourself feel better. They do not want other kids to know that, or sometimes they may be afraid of it themselves, so they don't want to inform their parents because they feel like there's something wrong with them.
What are some of the red flags to look for in children who may have OCD and in adults?
Anytime that you see overt signs of worries and fears that something bad will happen, Anytime that there are repetitive, ritualistic behaviors that need to happen over and over again. For kids, they may exhibit a lot of temper tantrums because, again, they don't understand what's happening with them. And when they're experiencing something really frightening, it can come across as a temper tantrum or an emotional meltdown. Kids who are spending, or even adults spending, a lot of time getting ready, whether it's getting ready in the morning for school or work, or specific things that they have to do to get ready for bed, that takes up a lot of time. Even if they're spending a lot of time in the bathroom, a lot of times kids or even adults with OCD may have contamination fears. So they would have specific rules and rituals that they would need to perform in the bathroom. Anytime if you have a family member who's repeating who's asking you to repeat a lot of particular phrases, such as, is this okay to do, or am I going to be safe? These are repetitive ritualistic behaviors to help reassure that nothing bad will happen. So these are some of the signs for both children and adults.
Now, how can you differentiate between a child that might have gone through a very traumatic experience and they're afraid to, say, go back to school or to a certain area because of that traumatic experience, and they keep playing in their head that that's a bad thing or that something bad will happen? Is that different from OCD?
I think it depends. Is the traumatic experience really a traumatic experience, or is it traumatic because I have a fear of contamination? So let me explain with this example. Let's say that I do have a fear of contamination, and I'm in the 5th grade, and the kid next to me keeps picking his nose. And I think that is really, really gross, and I can't stop thinking about him and his contaminated fingers, and he's picking his nose, and he's spreading it everywhere, and that's all that's happening in my mind, and I run out of my class. Well, that's a pretty traumatic experience for a person with OCD, and therefore I would not want to go back to school. However, is that a traumatic experience for another person? Perhaps not, if the person does not have contamination fears. Now, that is different than a traumatic experience as if, a fight occurs in school. And a fight occurs in school, and now I'm thinking, oh, wow, that was pretty scary, and I don't know if I want to go back to school because someone might bully me or might come to hurt me, and therefore I don't want to go to school because of that experience. Now, that one experience could be generalized to other kids. So not just the one kid would experience that. Other kids would feel the same way. So if that makes sense, that's how you would differentiate whether it's OCD or another traumatic experience that is pretty general for the majority of the population.
How early can a child be diagnosed with OCD? And what would you do about diagnosing it? How would you go about it?
Sure. Kids, they're usually diagnosed between the ages of 7 to 12. However, at the Renewed Freedom Center, we've seen kids as young as 3 with full-blown OCD. And a lot of people ask me, do I feel that it's because it's just occurring earlier in kids these days? And I don't think that's the case. I think with the increased awareness and media attention, parents are more able to identify the symptoms accurately early on, and therefore they can get the necessary help from an expert for the child before the symptoms worsen over time. As for how do you diagnose it in a child, at the Renewed Freedom Center, we must evaluate every patient before we can tailor an individualized treatment plan specific to the person's needs. It's a very detailed 3-hour evaluation that looks into specific triggers to the fears and the corresponding ritualistic compulsions or escape behaviors. And we always ask parents to be observant and document any positive or negative behavioral changes so that we can establish an accurate diagnosis. Now, once we're able to determine what those are, the behaviors and the fears and any changes in the child, then we are able to devise strategies to begin confronting those fears and breaking those behaviors.
Dr. Yip, how early can child be diagnosed with OCD?
Well, again, OCD is usually diagnosed between the ages of 7 and 12. However, at the Renewed Freedom Center, we've seen kids as young as 3 with full-blown OCD.
And is that the youngest patient that you have is 3?
Yes, that is the youngest patient that we've had.
And how do you treat OCD in children?
Well, the evidence-based treatment for OCD and anxiety disorders is cognitive behavior therapy, or simply CBT. It's not the traditional talk therapy or play therapy. CBT resembles going to school or learning a new skill. The expert's goal is to teach the patient about OCD and anxiety and the skills needed to defeat it, and the patient's role is to acquire the tools and practice using them in between sessions to strengthen the skills. In CBT, we help patients identify negative thinking patterns that aren't serving them, and this allows them to change their perspectives about themselves and the world so that they can engage in the environment in healthier ways. Now, specifically for OCD, exposure and response prevention therapy help kids confront their fears in a stepwise manner, so they learn that their fears actually aren't that threatening. Because when we avoid our fears, we're basically giving more meaning to the threat than what it typically deserves. So exposure and response prevention therapy helps children to disobey those ritualistic behaviors. So the OCD rules become weaker and weaker, and over time and with enough practice, the sufferer can actually break free from OCD.
Now, you said that OCD is linked to a neurological a symptom, something neurological. Do you use medication ever to treat this then?
There's over 2 decades of research that CBT actually changes the neurochemistry of the brain. So for kids, CBT would be the first route to take, especially when the young brain is still developing and growing, and there's so many negative side effects that come with medication. However, if a child's symptoms are very severe or the child refuses CBT, then that may warrant the use of medication. At the Renewed Freedom Center, if a patient comes in already on medication, we usually begin reducing it once the symptoms lessen and they're able to apply the CBT tools. So they can learn to rely on their own skills rather than depending on medications for the rest of their lives. And honestly, I'm not a huge proponent for medication use, especially in children, because for all of those negative side effects.
How long does it typically take for a child to improve?
That really depends on the severity and complexity of the symptoms as well as the intensity of the treatment. Some kids are quick learners and can adapt to the skills within a few months, while other kids will take longer. And since CBT isn't the traditional talk therapy, treatment doesn't go on for years and years without end. Kids in our program usually complete treatment within 6 to 12 months on a once-weekly basis. However, aside from the traditional weekly therapy, at the Renewed Freedom Center, we also have a 3-week intensive outpatient program for people needing a more rigorous treatment, or for those from other parts of the world needing a highly specialized pediatric OCD program. So in the intensive program, kids who come in initially debilitated return home in only a few weeks' time, being able to function normally again. Also keep in mind, though, that CBT requires you to practice the skills on your own once you've acquired them in session. So the rate of improvement really does depend on how much effort each child puts into the exercises assigned in between sessions. As in any physical exercise, you need to keep up the practice to keep the muscles strong. And CBT is essentially exercise for your brain. The more you flex those brain muscles, the stronger you become. And if you leave too much time in between your trainings, then the skills can get weak enough for the symptoms to return. So just like heart disease or diabetes, keeping OCD at bay really is a lifestyle change.
Now, I know a lot of people that have kids, and a few of them, their children obsess about their homework that is just not right, that they have to do something else to their homework. And some parents encourage this. Is that okay to do?
I would say a better way to look at this is to ask whether the amount of time perfecting is worth it. If we wanted to, we can spend every single minute of our day perfecting, and it still wouldn't be perfect. And if the need to perfect homework is taking time away from social interactions, family life, sports, and other activities, or even sleep, then it needs to be reevaluated. Generally, any time it needs to feel just right, you're leaning more in the direction of rigidity, which will be more problematic than simply a preference for perfection.
And what are parents able to do with this? How are they able to direct the energy elsewhere?
Well, I think a lot of times it's just encouraging them to do their best rather than needing perfection. Because again, if we wanted to do things perfectly, we can spend all the time in the world to be perfect and still won't be able to reach perfection. So the question is, how realistic is perfection? And it's really important for parents to encourage children to realize that there are other things in life that will take precedence over the need to be perfectionistic over every little thing. Some kids, they may want to be perfect in their sports, and they don't really care too much about their academic work. So then they're spending all of their time perfecting their skills at a specific sports. And the same concept would apply, is that you've got to be able to find a balance somehow. And perfectionism in any particular area in your life will take that away from a balanced life. So having parents to just encourage their children to do the best that they can and to be able to live a more balanced life would be the most important.
I know that a lot of kids may have a stigma of going to a therapist and getting help. How can a parent encourage a child to go get therapy, to be positive about therapy?
Mm-hmm. I think many kids are just embarrassed because they feel like they're the only ones. So parents can be helpful by finding information online and getting children's books on OCD or other anxiety disorders so that the child can feel less ashamed, because the truth is that there are many kids out there just like them. It would also be helpful to reassure the child that there are effective tools that they can learn to defeat OCD. However, they just have to go to the expert to learn them.
How can parents manage their own stress to effectively parent a child with OCD or anxiety disorder?
I think self-care is the first priority. How when you're on the airplanes, it tells you to put your own mask on first before putting it on for the child. I think in life that is very important and very true to any situation. You have to be able to take care of yourself first before you can be capable to take care of another. So definitely self-care, finding time to reduce your stress, whether it is, finding a hobby, or even taking time and going to the spa. So that's the first. Second, knowledge is power. Educating yourself on what constitutes evidence-based treatment and be informed consumers of mental health services. Interview therapists to ensure that they're the best person to work with your child. Third, I would say to learn skills to effectively manage and support an anxious child without enabling the condition. At the Renewed Freedom Center, as I've said before, we teach parents how to interact with their child that would be the most conducive to treatment, as well as to maintain healthy family dynamics.
Dr. Yip, can you tell us how the new healthcare system is going to, if it's going to help parents if they don't have health insurance, and to help with other resources to get their children help?
I am not sure about that because of two factors. The first is that you really need to weigh out the pros and cons with insurance companies. The truth is that many specialists, OCD specialists, anxiety specialists, are not going to be in insurance panels because even with the whole healthcare reform, insurance companies make it so challenging to get reimbursed. And also, most health insurance only provide limited benefits for mental health. So you really need to determine whether the benefits of the reimbursement rate is worth the additional expense of the insurance. So aside from insurance, though, there are a lot of research studies out there that offer free treatment for patients with OCD if you qualify. And you can look for those research studies. A lot of times they're occurring at universities. You can look for those research studies on the International OCD Foundation website, which is ocfoundation.org. Now, if you do not qualify for the research studies, or if the research studies are far away from you, look for treatment centers that offer sliding scales. At the Renewed Freedom Center, because we are a training center for interns and psychological fellows, we do offer sliding scales for patients to work with our interns and psychological fellows at a sliding scale. And I can tell you that if you're going to a specialized treatment center, the interns there will more than likely be more effective than any other clinicians who's had limited exposure to treating anxiety disorders or OCD.
And where can we find more information?
More information, you can definitely find more information about the Renewed Freedom Center at www.renewed, R-E-N-E-W-E-D, freedomcenter.com.
Dr. Yip, licensed psychologist and clinical assistant professor at the Psychiatry at USC Keck School of Medicine, and also executive director of Renewed Freedom Center. Thank you so much for providing all the information on OCD and what we can do to help our children.
Thank you so much again for having me.
Community matters, and we're your eyes and ears for what's going down in your town. We'll be back next week on AM 1110 Radio Disney.
Welcome to the Maya and Miguel Challenge. Meet Maya and the gang.
Oh, hi, I'm Maya.
Maya and her friends want you to get up and play, because it's always more fun to be active.
Let's get started.
Just go to letsmove.gov and look for Maya and Miguel. You'll find tons of fun activities that'll help keep you healthy and active. Whether you play sports, run, dance, or jump in place, just get up and play at least an hour a day. Take the Maya and Miguel Challenge today at letsmove.gov. A message from the Ad Council and HHS.
Jill, why don't you tell the class what you did this weekend?
Well, my dad and I went in search of some magical minnows and found a zillion of them in the stream from our lookout rock. Then my sister and I escaped from an evil slug king and went back to my super twig fort for safety. Then we told stories till it got dark, and the Big Dipper led us all the way home.
Wow. Where were you, Jill?
We went to the forest. It's not that far away.
Ask your parents to take you and your friends to the forest this week. It's closer than you think. Check out discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Arr! We be under attack. Man the long nine. Arr! Prepare to be boarded. Flagship, starboard bound. What? No, not by the enemy flagship. By garbage. The beautiful ocean be full of it these days. Many of folk don't know that when they throw their trash on the ground, it eventually makes its way into the ocean. So lend us a hand by always recycling and disposing of your trash properly. And learn more what you can do to keep the ocean healthy at keepoceansclean.org. Brought to you by the Keep Oceans Clean Alliance and the Ad Council.
I can help the next customer over here.
Oh, thank you.
Wow, that's a lot of books. Let's see. How to keep your child safe. Child-proofing your home. Child-proofing your yard. Child-proofing your in-laws' home and yard. Well, I'm guessing you have a little one at home?
Yeah.
Well, it looks like you must take good care of her.
Oh, thank you.
Now, let's see. Parent's Guide to Safe Toys. That's a really good one. Parent's Guide to Safe Foods. Parent's Guide to Safe Safety Products. Parent's Guide to Parenting Guides. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and other safety tips.
Of all the things you can read about keeping your child safe, the most important is attached to the back of their car seat. Read the instruction manual and learn to use the latch system. It makes it easier to be sure your child's car seat is installed correctly.
Parent's Guide to Telling Other Parents How to Raise Their Kids.
To learn more, go to safercar.gov. Anchor, Tether, Latch, the next generation of child safety. A message from the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Ad Council.
It's important to make sure your family has a plan in case of an emergency.
We talked to this family to see if each of them knew where to meet if they were not together when something happened.
Okay, so if a natural disaster happened and we were outside the home, we would all meet at the park. That's our meeting point. That's where we would say, go here, this is safe, Dad will be here. We meet there, we'll be fine.
Well, we would probably just meet out in front of the house.
I'm meeting places at our neighbor's house because she is my mom's good friend.
We all have a meeting spot, which is a bus stop. The reason for the bus stop is simply because nobody's going to be there. No buses, no people. There's probably going to be no traffic there. And it's a location that's in the middle of all 3 schools, so we can safely meet there, safely and quickly.
Is your plan any better? To learn more about making an emergency plan for your family, go to ready.gov. This message brought to you by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the Ad Council.
My name is Mary Crafts, and this is how I live united. I spent the last 24 years serving others in my catering company, but I felt that a huge part of our community was still being underserved. Those invisible children and young families. With United Way, I advocate for them any way I can. As a volunteer, I go into people's homes and assess mother and infant well-being and help bring change and opportunity into their lives. Nothing feels as good as helping, so I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
Give, advocate, volunteer, Live United. Go to liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Here in the U.S., we might not have everything we want, but we usually have everything we need, like clean, safe drinking water, public schools, medicine to make us well, and immunizations to keep us from getting sick. For the countries where many kids don't have the basics they need to survive, there's UNICEF. Working in over 150 countries, UNICEF has been saving children's lives for over 60 years. UNICEF does whatever it takes so that someday children everywhere will have what they need to survive. To learn more, visit unicefusa.org.
Radio Disney.